Live streaming is on.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bear with me while I put up links, and then I'll get into what this is and who I am and what I'm going to be doing. Um, Hopefully, people will enjoy this. Links, and then I'll get into what this is. But again, just bear with me. Why is that still doing that? Should be fine. There we go. Okay. That just about sets that up, though I'll share it as well. One more moment. Thank you for your patience. Documents. There it is. Excellent. I actually have somebody listening. Cool. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to what is technically the second ever, but is actually essentially the first episode of a new series I'm going to be doing called Grumpy Old Gamer. Some of you who watch this now or in the future may know me as Kevin Mears, demonologist and paranormal investigator in the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I have my own channel dedicated to all that, which is Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'll put a link in the description. But aside from being a big paranormal nerd who loves ghosts, demons, religion, philosophy, and all those kind of things, I'm just a huge nerd. I mean, seriously, folks, if you can't see it, and you probably can't, my shirt says, "Holy shit, I breathe hellhounds." "Harry," Michael said sternly, "you know I hate it when you swear. You're right, sorry. Holy shit, I breathed heckhounds." For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a quote from one of the greatest fantasy series of all time, the Dresden Files. But I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons for, let's say, about 31 years. I have been a video gamer since the early days of Nintendo Entertainment System. I love card games. I love board games. I love comic book movies. Heck, my fiance and I just got back from Bill and Ted Face the Music. I am a geek. I am proud of the fact that I am a geek. And I have always been a geek. And as much as I adore doing Paranormal Encyclopedia, and anyone who listens to this is a fan of Paranormal Encyclopedia, don't worry. That's not going to stop. That's not going to change. This is just a side thing that I'm also going to try to do once a week. So I'll be putting out 2 videos a week. But I wanted a platform to talk about my love of geekiness. For those of you who are into role-playing games and that kind of thing, who might be wondering why you should listen to me when there's a dozen other channels. For example, there is How to Be a Great Dungeon Master. There's XP to Level 3. There's the Dungeon Dudes. There's a whole bunch of... There's, of course, Critical Role and Matt Mercer and all of that. There are, in short, a lot of really cool other channels that deal with geeky subjects. Why should you listen to me instead of all of them? Well, the snarky answer would be, I'm older than a lot of them. I've been doing this longer than a lot of them. The more honest answer would be, there's no reason you can't listen to all of us, find out who you like, and listen to that guy. I have something I want to say about game, particularly about gaming. That's going to be a lot of what this show is going to be about. That is not bad. I'm not going to say I have a better opinion, because all the channels I've just named, I've watched many of their videos, and I have a lot of respect for what they do. I don't have a better opinion than them. I would hope I don't have a worse opinion than them. What I do have is possibly a different perspective on things. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since it came in a little red cardboard box with its own dice. You know, I have played first, second, third, fourth, and fifth edition D&D. I have played multiple editions of Call of Cthulhu. I collect role-playing games. I've played every role-playing incarnation of the Star Wars universe that has ever been released. I know a lot of different games. I know some of the history. I've met and even have been friends with some people that worked on various games. It gives me a different way of looking at it than other people. And hopefully you'll find that fun. And if you don't, and particularly, I'm starting off with a contentious topic here, which is I'm going to talk about the classic Dungeons & Dragons alignment system. I'm going to go through what I think each of the 9 alignments means. And then I'm going to go through who I think fits in all of these. Now, of course, as you should all know, since I've been at this for 30 years, my word is law, and no one has any right to question where I stick people. And that is, of course, completely ridiculous. Please, if you enjoy this, if you disagree with me, please feel free to tell me where I'm wrong in the comments below. If you agree with me, let me know what you like. If you think there's somebody I forgot that belongs somewhere on this list, add it. It's all welcome. It's all in good fun. Probably the next video we'll do is going to be about running horror games and how to run horror games in a way that's a little different than what people expect. Because my experience with the paranormal and my life of studying folklore and mythology gives me a slightly different perspective on horror than normal people. Sometimes, and in this case, I'll toot my own horn and say maybe a slightly better one, because I see things other people aren't necessarily going to see. Because if you haven't spent all night in a supposedly haunted house waiting for something weird to happen, you don't know what that's like, and you don't know the sort of things that most commonly happen the way that someone who has, no matter how many books you read on the subject. So I think I'll give you guys some neat perspective there. Not to say that there aren't other people. Again, I'm not dissing other people's channels. Just like with Paranormal Encyclopedia, it is not my position here to say that anyone who isn't me sucks. It's to give my perspective. But I wanted to start with something fun. And I actually tried to do this one. The first time I tried to do a video for the channel 2 years ago was on alignment, and I think I screwed it up terribly. So I've decided I'm going to try it again. And I did something I almost never do when I do videos, and don't get used to it. I probably won't be doing it again. Which is I actually made some notes about who I think fits into which alignment. But the first thing I want to do is explain what the 9 alignments are and what they, in my opinion, they mean. This may disagree with the books. That's okay. It's, again, perspectives. For those of you who may not be familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, particular members of my regular channel, D&D separates morality into categories. These categories are primarily based on 2 axes. One is law versus chaos. The other one is good versus evil. This means you could be lawful good or chaotic good, or lawful evil or chaotic evil, or neutral good or neutral evil for that matter, or just neutral. So I think the first thing that helps before I go into what I think each one means is how do I distinguish between law and chaos and good and evil to put some perspective on everything else I want to talk about. So for the purposes of this video, I see lawful characters, to put it in real world terms, I see lawful characters as very much what liberals are meant to be. Let me preface this. I'm not making a value judgment on liberalism or conservatives. This is just, I think, a handy way to think about this. Liberals are about social order. Liberals are about big government. It's that whole idea of having, a strong central power. Conservatives are more traditionally chaotic, weaker central power, more individual liberty, less security. Neither is inherently better than the other, in my opinion. And I'm not saying again, and this is an important thing to understand about the difference between law and chaos. They're not value judgments. Somebody can be a good person, and we're getting good in even a minute, and value personal liberty over social order. Somebody can love social order and be a bad person. It's a question of how much do they believe in the importance of the rule of law. Lawful characters think it's very important, although they may be willing to fight social order they see as unjust. Chaotic characters think people should rule themselves, are revolutionaries, or people that think that people can rule. They're anarchists, people who can rule themselves. You don't need the government looking over your shoulder. Again, I'm not saying that actual liberals or actual conservatives fall into these categories per se. Actual humans are more complicated than alignments. But the ideals, the idea of that conservatives are traditionally in favor of smaller government and state rights over federal rights, where liberals are the other way around, is kind of that idea. It's where do they see power, and who do they and how much freedom do they give up for how much safety? Where neutrals tend to fall more in between the two. People who probably try to follow the law, but are more than happy to ignore them when necessary. Who see the value of personal freedom and liberty, but see the value of law. They don't see a need to eliminate strong central government. They're the moderates in the political example I'm giving here. Now, for good and evil, I think this is a little easier to explain, at least in my opinion. Good aligned characters, in my opinion, are best summarized as selfless versus evil characters, which are inherently selfish. Both good and evil characters can both value power, but what lines are they willing to cross to get it? A good character will run for office. An evil character will assassinate the person and seize power. A good character will bargain with a prisoner. An evil character is willing to just torture the person. There's shades of gray here, certainly, which is also, again, where neutral characters come in. I think neutral works the most logically, particularly in RPG setting, as what people think of as enlightened self-interest, where you're not acting in a selfless manner, where you're not acting just to help people for the sake of helping people, but you're helping people because you see that helping others ultimately benefits yourself. You're not trying to say, simple enough example without, again, I don't want to get into politics, so don't take this as me voicing a political opinion. But a useful way of looking at this would be climate change. If we take, for the sake of argument, that man-made climate change is a thing, whether you believe it or not, for the sake of argument, I don't want to go there politically. A good character wants to cut down greenhouse gases and all of that because it's the right thing to do. An evil character doesn't care and they won't necessarily go out of their way to destroy the environment, but they're not really because that's just crazy. But they're not going to they're not going to inconvenience themselves to protect it. A neutral person is likely to try to protect the environment because of the reality. Smog is a greenhouse gas. Smog causes respiratory illness. I don't want respiratory illness, therefore we need to reduce smog. I'll wear a mask during the COVID outbreak because I don't want to get sick. I don't care if you get sick. I don't want to get sick. It's there's a degree of selfishness in there, but it's still benefiting other people. where the evil person's like, no, heck with you, heck with anyone else. I have a right not to wear a mask if I don't want to. Okay, that is a little political because I'm sorry, wear the bloody mask, people. There's a lot more complicated things you could get into there about the nature of good and evil and selflessness versus selfishness. But I think that's a very handy way to look at it, particularly in game terms. Because a big important thing to keep in mind, because aside from having a little bit of fun and talking about who's what, the idea of me doing this video is actually to sort of help out new players of D&D. And if you're going to use an alignment system, don't get too strict into it. And the worst thing you can do with an alignment system in D&D is get bogged down into tiresome arguments about, well, is that a good action or is that an evil action? Should your alignment shift? Should you get penalized for that? That's all a bad idea. Those types of philosophical issues bog the game down and aren't a whole lot of fun for anybody. Which is something else I'll get into towards the end, after I get into the 9 alignments and who I think fits where, which is the fact that I think the alignment system is outdated and we don't really need it at all anymore. But basically, in Dungeons & Dragons since first edition, there have been 9 alignments. I'll get into what those in a second, but as for a matter of history for you young whippersnappers out there, in the very first versions of Dungeons & Dragons, when I grew up with Dungeons & Dragons, there were 3 alignments: lawful, neutral, and chaotic. Lawful were generally the good guys, chaotic were the bad guys, neutral was in the middle. That was it. These days, it's become more complicated than that. You have lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, neutral good, true neutral, neutral evil, chaotic good, chaotic neutral, chaotic evil. 9 alignments. So starting from the top, I'm going to because I think I'm going to lose people if I go through what it means and then come back to who fits in each alignment. I'm going to go through the 9 from the top with lawful good, explain what it means in my opinion, and give some examples of characters I think fit there, and then go down. So the lawful good are the truth, justice, American way type of characters. Paladins are very much in classic D&D the archetypical lawful good character. They're going to do the right thing. They're going to enforce the law. They're going to work within the system wherever possible. A lawful good character, for example, in a society that allows slavery, should not own slaves, because owning slaves is an inherently evil action. But in a lawful society, a lawful good character is probably not going to go running around freeing slaves illegally. They're going to work within the system. They're going to buy slaves just to free them. They are going to work to change laws, work to change the king's mind. They're going to work within the system instead of just tearing it down. The ultimate obvious example of a lawful good character in fiction, I highly doubt anyone's going to argue with me on this, is Superman. This is the lawful good thing is why people call him a Boy Scout. He's good, he's kind, he's extremely honest, he works within the law, he is out front showing his face, working with the police, not hiding behind a mask. He is supposed to represent all the ideals of what the U.S. can and should be. Another obvious example of this, although this is a good example of a character whose alignment changes over time, is Captain America. Particularly, I'm not as familiar with comic books as I am with the movies. So primarily, I mean Captain America in the movies, particularly the movies prior to Civil War, is a lawful good character. He works within the system. He represents the United States. He represents what he thinks the United States should be. He isn't out there trying to destroy social order and tear apart the Avengers and things like that at this point in his career. Now, a really interesting example of how different interpretations of the same character can have different alignments is that, well, I don't think Batman is normally a lawful good character. The Adam West interpretation of Batman is a lawful good character. I mean, it's mentioned in at least one of the episodes that he's been formally deputized by Gotham PD. He's a legitimate representation of legal authority in the city of Gotham. He is very law-abiding. He is very straight and narrow. Another good example of this that's very true in the movie version and the animated versions I've seen, and I understand to some extent it's probably actually true in the comics, is Shazam, or Captain Marvel, who is a very straight and narrow, literal Boy Scout. Particularly, this is telling because he's a little kid. He's very idealistic and very about doing the right thing and all of that. Another good example of how alignments change is, of course, Robin Hood. While Robin Hood in most of the classic stories about him is chaotic good because he's trying to overthrow, and we're going to revisit this subject when we come back to Robin Hood and chaotic good, but he's trying to overthrow the legitimate authority, Prince, and technically, sort of speaking, King John. The minute that Richard the Lionhearted, the king that he has sworn his allegiance to, returns, he is a loyal and faithful vassal of the king. Most of the Knights of the Round Table, also in mythology, also falls squarely into the lawful good category. Galahad is certainly lawful good. Arthur is very lawful good. Gawain is mostly lawful good. Lancelot on his better days is lawful good. Now, a particular character, and this is actually kind of why this shirt's appropriate, I want to talk about is from the Dresden Files, who is, I think, is possibly the archetypical example of how to play a lawful good character properly, which is Michael Carpenter. Anyone who, like me, who's been around for a few editions of Dungeons and Dragons knows that lawful good characters, particularly paladins, tend to fall into a subcategory we lovingly refer to as lawful stupid. Paladins tend to be myopic. Kill the evil one. But wait, we can negotiate. No, kill the evil one. But wait, he could be... No, kill the evil one. It's a stupid way to play the character, and it actually very quickly slides from lawful good into darker alignments. Michael is a perfect example of how to play a lawful good paladin well. If you are unrepentantly evil, Michael will smite the ever-loving crap out of you without hesitating. But if he sees a spark, a hope of redeeming you, of bringing you back to good, he'll stay his hand. Slow to anger, quick to forgive. Kind, compassionate, caring. This is how paladins should be. Look at their powers. Yes, fifth edition, perfect example. Look at their powers. Yes, they can smite the ever-loving crap out of evildoers. But they can also lay on hands and heal damage. They can heal disease. They have healing spells. They are God's right arm. But, and this is a good example from Christian theology, Michael the Archangel is a great example of a paladin. He is the warrior. He is the angel that specifically, personally, took Lucifer by the ear and threw him out of heaven. He is the greatest fighter in God's arsenal. He's also a patron of disease and of healing. There are healing shrines dedicated to Michael all over the world. Just because you fight, and especially if you fight for a just cause, doesn't mean you have to be a jerk. Now, I think a good, interesting example of a character that is arguably lawful good, who is not nice, is Queen Titania from the Dresden Files. She is this. She is the side of fairy that isn't destructive, that isn't scary. She isn't harmless, but she follows the rules. She abides by her oaths. And her job is to make sure that Mab, who is almost lawful good but is a little too dark, doesn't go too far. I think there's an excellent case to make that in the context of the Dresden Files, Titania and Mother Summer are actually lawful good. So rolling this right along, lawful neutral. The best way to summarize lawful neutral, in my opinion, is the trope, the stereotype of my country right or wrong. Lawful neutral characters are dedicated to their to a very strict code of law or ethics. Because that's the other thing. Lawful characters don't have to always be rigidly following the rules. A member of a monastic order that follows very strict rules is still a lawful character. A samurai absolutely dedicated to Bushido is still a lawful character, even in a society where they don't follow the laws of the country. But it is, I will follow the rules, I will follow the orders of my leaders in my order of society, regardless of whether I think they're acceptable or not. Now, one place I definitely disagree with D&D is I think a lot of people are actually lawful neutral. D&D tends to label the average human person as true neutral. But I don't agree, and I'll get into some of the reasons for that when we get down to true neutral, or neutral, if you will. But I think most people are actually lawful neutral because many people just do what the law says they have to do because the law says they have to do it. They're not particularly cruel, but they're not likely to really go out of their way to save another person. Most people. As much as we'd like to think otherwise, many of us, maybe most of us, are not ready to lay down our lives for a stranger. Which I think is an important point about the selfless thing. There's a fundamental difference between being willing to sacrifice your life for someone you love and to do it for someone you never met. In fiction, a perfect example, in my opinion, of our species that is extremely lawful neutral are the Time Lords from Doctor Who. Particularly in Classic Who. Because they sit back and they observe. They don't get involved. Even with the Daleks, who are trying to wipe out all other intelligent life in the universe. Time Lords don't get involved. Until they become a big enough threat the Time Lords have to, which is the Time War. Cybermen kill thousands. They don't get, maybe millions or even billions. They don't get involved. The only time they usually step in, and I think there's an excellent argument to be made, this is why they stepped in with the Daleks, is when there's a threat that endangers the entire structure of reality, the space-time continuum. They start getting involved with the Time Lords, even with fighting the Daleks, even in the original series. When the Daleks start getting the ability to time travel and start trying to screw with history. Another real good example, I don't know a whole lot about them, but as I understand it, is the Watchers from the Marvel Universe. Who, again, they sit, they watch, they observe, they don't get involved. Most of the Q continuum from Star Trek is lawful neutral. They might get involved if there's a threat to all of space-time, but with the exception of John Delancey's character, who we'll get to, they watch. They don't do anything. Another good example of this, actually, also from Star Trek, from Deep Space Nine particularly, is Odo. Well, as DS9 progresses, you see him gaining greater empathy Odo is very much about order and rules and law. He'll allow Quark to operate, but only because he sees Quark as useful bait to catch the bigger fish. He doesn't tend to act, particularly in the flashbacks you see to when the Cardassians were running this station. He doesn't act generally doesn't seem to act out of kindness or compassion, but out of a feeling of a sense of a need for order. Another great example of this in the Star Trek universe is the Federation itself. The Federation, and a lot of fans of the Federation, likely have delusions of being lawful good. They see themselves as good, nice, kind, and benevolent, and acting for the betterment of everyone. The problem is their absolute dedication to the Prime Directive. That the Federation and Starfleet are content to watch entire worlds burn rather than get involved in the natural progress of civilization. While he often rises above it, even though he shouldn't, Picard is largely lawful neutral. Kirk, I actually should have mentioned, I think is far more of a somewhat cowboy version of lawful good, in that he's lawful enough in that he's concerned with order and rank and things like that, but he'll ignore the rules if he thinks he needs to do it for the greater good. Where Picard is very much, a number of the interesting ethical quandaries of Next Generation specifically relate to not being, wanting to help somebody, but not being willing to violate that Prime Directive. Artificial intelligence is in a lot of sci-fi, are even some of the cooler ones, are lawful neutral. They follow their programming. Even some of the crueler ones. A perfect example of this in the old 90s era X-Men cartoon is the Sentinels. And the fact the Sentinels inevitably turn on the humans. But the reason they turn on the humans is based on logic. They were created for the purpose of hunting and eliminating mutants. But mutants are essentially just humans. So really their commandment is to hunt and control and contain humans. It's not a good act, but it's not necessarily evil act. They're acting out of a sense of order and based on programming. And the last group that often fits here are samurai, both in fiction and in history. The reality of they're, at least in the idyllic sense, in reality it's always more complicated than that, dedicated to this idea of a code of honor, of Bushido, of loyalty to the Lord. And while some of them can certainly be good people, there's also the reality of they would not, there are times in history and some samurai that would see nothing wrong with cutting the head from a peasant's neck for not showing proper respect. And they see nothing immoral about that because that's the traditions of the society they live in. You show respect to your superior. It isn't an act of cruelty, which would make it evil. It's not a selfish act. This is the rules of the society we live in. You must abide by them. Which brings us into, another really good example of lawful evil, James Bond. Lawful neutral. Not lawful evil. We're getting lawful evils. We're going next. Is James Bond. James Bond, from what I know, very much so in the books, and generally in the movies, certainly the more recent movies, I have orders I have to follow. If those orders are to assassinate somebody, if those orders are to blow something, or sabotage, blowing things up, then he'll carry them out. That's his job. He isn't cruel about it. He isn't not generally going to spare somebody's life out of an act of kindness. If his job is to assassinate his target, he assassinates his target. He moves on. Agent 47 from all the Hitman games I've played, I haven't played all of them, granted. He is an assassin. He kills people for money. But the idea is he only kills the person he's hired to kill. He isn't acting out of cruelty. It's a job. Jedi. are also most Jedi are a really good example of a lawful neutral. They're compassionate, but they're bound to the codes of their order, they're bound to the rules, they're bound within the Republic. And particularly in the expanded universe, there's a lot of times Jedi refuse to act because they think they need more time to consider it and more time to debate it while people suffer. There are Jedi that certainly go up to lawful good. Yoda, particularly in Empire Strikes Back, Obi-Wan, pretty much most of the surviving Jedi that haven't gone dark, like Anakin, by the time of A New Hope, have gone lawful good, or some variety of good. But a lot of the ones in the Republic era, particularly the older eras of the Republic, we are bound by the code of the Jedi, we are bound by the rule of the Senate. We may care about other people, we may act to decrease suffering, but we won't act outside of our rules. That brings us to lawful evil. Lawful evil is the alignment of the tyrant. It is the alignment of the of the lawyer who will use every trick in the law to get his client, to get a person found guilty, or found innocent, or get a case around in terms of a lawsuit, even though they know that they're representing someone who's the mob lawyer who gleefully gets the mob boss he knows has ordered multiple murders off on a technicality. They always act within the rules, but they use the rules to their advantage. Lawyers in general also are often enough lawful neutral, or even and often enough lawful good as well, and they follow the rule of law. Ideally, good lawyers follow the rule of law first and foremost. Even a defense attorney, at least ideally, a defense attorney who knows that they're representing a guilty a murderer or a guilty person, will still give them the best defense possible because they believe in the idea that people have a right to, every single person has a right to an adequate defense, and that if the rights and liberties that the Constitution and other laws set out for people aren't respected, that people can't just be thrown in court for that. So in fiction, who fits into lawful evil? Dialects are a perfect example of lawful evil. A lot of people, particularly when I get into what chaotic evil means, would think of them as chaotic evil because their ultimate goal is to kill everything in the universe that isn't them. The key point, though, which makes them lawful instead of chaotic, is the isn't them. It's that sense of uniformity. It's that fact that most of the emotions have been stripped from them. They want a universe that is all the same. And they will kill anything that doesn't fit their vision of the perfect universe. That's what makes them lawful evil. They want order, they don't want chaos, they don't want random destruction. They have a very specific goal that they're trying to carry out. Cybermen are another good example of this from Doctor Who. They're cold, they act on logic and reason. They think that everybody needs to either be turned into a Cyberman or eliminated. But they're still logical, they're still orderly, they still behave by a set of rules. Not for nothing with dialects as well. In the original series of Doctor Who, before the reboot, they were at war with a species called the Movellans for decades because both were extremely logical, and both sides kept calculating each battle out as a perfect stalemate. So they refused to even fight each other because thinking about it logically, they couldn't see a way to get past the stalemate. So they just basically had an ongoing Cold War until somebody, specifically the Doctor, pointed out to them that a way to break this cycle of pure logic. Now, the cornerstone of lawful evil, the poster child for the alignment, in my opinion, is Darth Vader. The Emperor is not a lawful evil character. He's neutral evil. We'll get into that when I get into neutral evil. Vader is lawful evil. Vader wants to overthrow the Emperor, which seems like a chaotic act, but he wants to take the Emperor's place. He wants an orderly galaxy. He wants to eliminate the chaos. He wants to eliminate the strife. He wants to eliminate the rebellion. Those are the acts of a lawful character. He's absolutely cruel, sadistic, ruthless, and willing to kill anyone who gets in his way. But it's acting with that sense of order. Lex Luthor is another perfect example of lawful evil because of the fact he acts within the law. Whenever he can, he acts within the law. Which is the other thing about lawful evil is they usually act within the law. They're more than willing to bend and even break it if it suits their purposes. But they always start by trying to work within the law. That's what makes Lex. Lex is a corrupt businessman. He's a corrupt politician. Some days he's the president of the United States. He isn't trying to destroy anything. He cares about social order. He cares about business. Which is what makes him lawful versus neutral. But he will use the system to his own advantage. Queen Mab in Dresden Files is either on the very dark end of lawful neutral or lawful evil. She is not a chaotic or neutral character. She's absolutely, if she gives her word, she honors it. No exceptions. That is the act of a lawful character. Her actions are in favor of the. If you haven't read the Dresden Files, spoilers. But in Dresden Files, you find out in Cold Days that the Lovecraftian outsiders, the basically Cthulhu and company that exist outside of the boundaries of our reality, are constantly trying to get in and wreck everything. Essentially, are being held in check by Mab and her forces. That is the reason the Winter Court of Fairy exists. Like I said, Summer Court exists to keep Winter in check. Winter is the frontline soldiers stopping this invasion. The reason why she falls into dark neutral, or lawful neutral, or lawful evil is she is far too cruel and manipulative and sadistic to be a good character. Moving along, another perfect example of lawful evil in so many ways is Lucifer or Satan in most depictions of him. You see this in two ways. First, Lucifer wants order. He wants to overthrow God. He wants to overthrow the existing order and swoop in and take its place. He wants to be God. He doesn't want a lawless universe where no one answers to anyone. No one has to answer to anyone. He wants everyone to bow to him. That's lawful. And of course, he's cruel, sadistic, and willing to damn people, which makes him evil. The other example you see of it, and this is true of many devils in fiction and folklore, and genies in fiction and folklore, is the deal making. Is the I will give you what you want in return for your soul or whatever. And that he followed traditionally, particularly in folklore, not always in fiction, but almost always in folklore, the devil honors the deal. If he says, he may honor the spirit of the deal, but he honors the church. Sorry about having to move the laptop. I had to plug it in. It got the power cord came loose. But he honors the terms of the deals that he makes. Jinn honor the terms of the wishes that they grant, even if they don't follow the intent behind them, as it said, the spirit. Predators from Predator and Alien vs. Predator are a great example. They hunt sentient creatures for sport. This is inherently an evil and selfish act. That said, they have a code of honor. You see this in the second Predator movie, when at the end of the movie, the cop who beat the Predator is offered an antique pistol as a sign of respect. You see this in how the character at the end of Alien vs. Predator is treated by the Predators. With respect. You have proven yourself worthy, so we respect you. Also, Star Trek terms, Cardassians, very militaristic, lawful evil. Romulans, manipulative, plotter. The plotter, the schemer, the wheels within wheels characters are generally lawful evil. The Master, from Doctor Who. He doesn't want to destroy the universe. He actually acts, in the, original series in particular, he acts alongside the Doctor on more than one occasion to save the universe. He just wants to rule it. That's what makes... All the times that he has saved the universe have been because if there's no universe left, I have nothing to rule. That's what makes him evil instead of good, even though his actions seem to be altruistic. This brings us out of the lawful alignments into the neutral alignments. Neutral good. Neutral good characters do what they think is right. They work within the law if they think the law is helping people. They will ignore laws if they think the laws are ultimately hurting people. A lot of people that are trying to free slaves are probably neutral good. If they're actually actively trying to attack slave owners and sabotage things to help slaves get free, that's more chaotic good. But just let's the Underground Railroad idea, let's just get them out of the area it can often be neutral good. The obvious example of this is Luke Skywalker. He isn't in the rebellion to overthrow the Empire and start the New Republic. He isn't in it to overthrow the Order and let everyone live free. He's in it to help his father. He doesn't care about who runs the show. At the end of the day, he cares about helping people. That's neutral good. Most versions of Batman are neutral good. He works within the law when it suits his purposes. He is more than happy to ignore it when it doesn't. Another favorite character of mine, Geralt of Rivia. For all his protestations, he is generally speaking a good guy. He acts with kindness. He acts with compassion, even if he doesn't want to admit it. But particularly with neutrality is a big part. Particularly with Witchers, they don't get involved in politics. They don't overthrow kingdoms. They don't help prop up kingdoms. They just do the job. Shiro from Dresden Files, neutral good character. He's not concerned with society, with order and chaos. He's interested in just helping people and doing what he thinks is right. No, I'm just thinking of Aang from the Avatar series. He's part of the natural order, but he doesn't answer to anyone. He's on his own. He's not trying to overthrow the Fire Nation. He's trying to stop it. Particularly he doesn't want to kill Fire Lord Ozai. Zuko doesn't fit here. He's actually lawful. He goes from lawful neutral to lawful good. I should have mentioned that earlier, just by virtue of his very strict reliance on his code of honor and his emphasis on it. True neutral, which is one of the hardest ones to deal with, because balance. The easiest way I think to explain it, there's not a lot to get into, is think Taoism, where it's a balance of good and evil and both are equal, and you need both to have a society. The only good examples I can think of, animals are true neutral. They act on their natures. They aren't inherently cruel. They aren't inherently kind. They just are. The Ents from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, who they don't care. They're not in it for morality. They're not in it because they care about human societies. They're in it because they care about protecting the natural world. And this is another one that a lot of people would disagree with me on, but I think I'm absolutely right about. The xenomorphs, the aliens from the Alien series, are true neutral. They are not evil. The reason I say this is because, yes, they're predatory. Yes, they kill people. They seem to enjoy killing people. I should change that one. But they aren't evil. To actually be evil requires the ability to reason. You have to be able to choose evil. They don't seem to have an intelligence. They're animal level intelligence, which is what makes them true neutral. They eat because that's what they do. Neutral evil. I don't care about order. I don't care about chaos. I care about doing what I want to do. The perfect example of this is Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious. He goes through a very elaborate, complicated plot to make himself emperor. But his ultimate goals are to expand his power. Creating an empire is a means to an end. He doesn't care about order. He just sees the empire as a tool. He just saw becoming chancellor as a tool. It's a stepping stone on his goal of attaining a greater understanding of the dark side of the Force. Most Sith in general are probably often neutral evil. They're not. They may want to rule, which many of them want to rule, which gives them that lawful evil. But a lot of them are just in it for themselves, and they're in it for the accumulation of power. It's hard to think of a whole lot of examples for the neutrals, just because it's hard to think of characters that don't lean some way between the personal versus societal axis. So we get on to chaotic good. Chaotic good is individual right, individual freedom, doing what you think is right, and happily tearing down social order to do it. A good example, anarchists that actually have good moral reasons for doing what they do would fall here. Specifically, revolutionaries often fall here. Robin Hood is here, at least when John is in charge. Because yes, he wants to tear down the social order, but he doesn't want to tear it down and leave anarchy in its wake. He wants to tear it down and put what he sees as the rightful king on the throne. Oh, I forgot the most obvious example. I'll go back to neutral good in a second. I forgot one of the best examples of it. But a lot of revolutionaries in fiction are chaotic good, or at least temporarily so. The obvious example of neutral good I forgot, and this is a really good one. Jesus Christ would be a really good example of neutral good. Apologies to other religious people who may find that offensive, because here's the thing. Jesus, or at least his time on earth the first time, not talking about the second coming or how he is in heaven, because he doesn't show up to tear apart the Roman Empire. He doesn't show up to set up Jewish rulership of the earth. He just shows up to teach and try to make the world a better place. To teach, to save people from their sins, to make the world a little bit better of a place, which is what makes him neutral good. He certainly works, he doesn't fly in the face of Roman law. When he's handed the Roman coin and asked about paying taxes to Caesar, his face is on this coin. Caesar's, and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He's a good example of neutral good. Because he's about doing what he sees as right. If it's within the law, he'll work within the law. If he has to reach out, but he'll also reach out to the social pariahs, to the prostitutes and the tax collectors, and treat them with the same kindness as well. He sits between order and chaos. He sits in the middle and based solely on his own sense of right and wrong. Back to chaotic good. Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden is a walking, talking chaotic good. He doesn't like social order. He doesn't like bully. He hates bullies. He doesn't like having to answer to anyone. He's about doing what he does what he thinks is right, but to hell with rules. Hell with your rules. I'm doing the right thing. He's not completely without rules. He follows the 7 laws of magic, but he will make a deal with Mab. He will consider deals with demons. He will do things like that to accomplish what he sees as the right thing, and he will burn your entire culture down to save an innocent life. He did it in Changes. Molly Carpenter is also a really good example of chaotic good. She's very independent. She shares Harry's dislike of rules and strict structure and chain of command. Ebenezer is a good example of chaotic good too, for that matter. Whereas a lot of the certainly the Merlin is lawful neutral. Morgan is lawful neutral. A lot of members of the White Council are lawful neutral or lawful good, but Ebenezer and Harry's general disdain for bowing and scraping to you because you're the boss are the signs of a chaotic character. As is Molly's. Sonya is also a good example of chaotic good. I think it's interesting that the 3 Knights of the Cross represent, at least in my opinion, the three good alignments. For the record, I think Waldo Butters is neutral good. With lawful good. Actually, no, I think he's lawful good now that I think about it. He tries to follow the law. He tries to stay within society's rules. He's a little more flexible about it, a little more flexible on the lawful than Michael is, arguably, but I think ultimately he's a lawful character. Sonya, though, is very much about the will of the people. He sees himself as a Tolstoyist, and nearly as even Harry compares him to communism in this. But he's definitely one of the good guys. Now I come to the alignment that's probably the hardest to do right, other than true neutral, which is chaotic neutral. A lot of players, in particular, when they play lawful or chaotic neutral, play chaotic evil characters and call it chaotic neutral because the DM says they can't be chaotic neutral evil. Chaotic neutral. The only thing you have to absolutely do to be chaotic neutral is don't be consistent. If you're always evil, you're not chaotic neutral. If you're always good, you're not chaotic neutral. For the most part, if you flip a coin and let the coin decide every day, you're leaning towards chaotic neutral. The irony of this is the most obvious example of that kind of character, which is Harvey Dent. And Harvey Dent is lawful evil. He is too driven by his internal sense of order and his rules to qualify as chaotic neutral. He's awful. On the other hand, particularly the Adam West version, but some other incarnations of the Joker are chaotic neutral. When he's not a raving sociopath that's happy to kill people, he tends to be chaotic neutral. He might shoot you in the face. He might buy you a brand new car. He might buy you a brand new car and then shoot you in the face. You don't know. He doesn't know. Joker is almost always a chaotic character. Depending on how outwardly malevolent he is, he's often on off a chaotic. He can be a chaotic neutral or chaotic evil, but he's pretty much always a chaotic character. But the one character who is universally, every depiction of him I have ever seen, unfailingly, the perfect example of how to play chaotic neutral properly is Captain Jack Sparrow. There's a great story of one of the Disney execs who visited the set of the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And the very first time he saw Captain Johnny Depp dressed up as Jack in character. And he said, is he supposed to be gay or drunk? If people look at your character, what they do and go, are asking those kind of questions, you're probably on your way to playing a chaotic neutral character. properly. He is not evil. He loves freedom and liberty far too much to be ever be evil. He's not willing to screw people over, but he's not a good guy. He will rob you blind. He won't kill you unless he absolutely has to. He respects life too much, which is chaotic neutrals can respect life because there's that whole individualism that is part of chaotic. But he's not going to ever act consistently. You also see this in the way that he fights. He has been said multiple times by the fight choreographers and other people that worked on the movie that would know in the movies that he is the worst fencer of all of the characters. The best is generally supposed to be Will. Then Hector Barbosa and Norrington are more or less tied for second place. Jack has beaten all three of them in duels in the movies because he's chaotic neutral. Because they, good or evil, all three of them are generally speaking lawful characters. They follow the decorum and the rules and the traditional way that duels are supposed to be handled. Jack will cheerfully cheat to win. He doesn't care about his rule is, I'm going to survive this thing. And he will do whatever he needs to do to accomplish that goal. That's what makes him chaotic neutral. That brings us to chaotic evil. And Alfred Pennyworth in The Dark Knight sums up chaotic neutral better than anyone else I have ever seen when he says, some men just want to watch the world burn. Characters that want to destroy everything are generally chaotic evil. The three obvious examples I came up with is most incarnations of the almost all really incarnations of the Joker are chaotic evil. He's a sociopath. He will cheerfully murder you for pleasure. He won't always murder you, which is that chaotic side. You see the chaotic side of the chaotic evil represented very well in the animated series, where there are episodes where he will poison to death an entire room full of the entire audience of a talk show for not laughing at his joke. And then there's the episodes where he spreads dumps a version of his Joker toxin into the Gotham Harbor, not to kill anyone, but to give all the fish in Gotham Harbor the Joker grin so he can patent it and make a fortune. It's a crazy plan. Nobody dies. He's not a nice guy. He is too selfish, too inclined to cruelty and to cause suffering to ever be chaotic neutral in most incarnations. But he is an agent of chaos. The one who arguably actually is more neutral evil than chaotic evil for all of his protestations about being an agent of chaos is Heath Ledger's Joker. I love Heath Ledger's Joker, don't get me wrong. But if you analyze what he does in that movie, it's too well thought out and too well planned to really be chaotic. The amount of planning that would have had to go into his entire situation of the two boats that are rigged with explosives, each with a detonator to blow up the opposite ship, that kind of structure and experiment, as it were, is really not a chaotic type of plan. Also, Doctor Who, because I'm a huge Doctor Who nerd. I'm not sorry. I forgot the Doctor. Doctor's chaotic good, easy chaotic good. He has no respect for authority. That's clear in many incarnations. He doesn't care what your rank is. He doesn't want authority himself. He's just going to do what he does what he thinks is right. To hell with the rules. He's too anti-authority to be neutral. And then, but Davros is chaotic evil, unlike his creation, the Dialects, because Davros hates everything. He wants to destroy the universe. I mean, particularly you see in his first appearance in the new series, that his development of the reality bomb, where it's like, this is taking too long, we're going to just blow everything that isn't us up. Trigon from the Titans live action series is chaotic evil. He wants to destroy the planet. He wants to destroy every living thing on it. There's the term they use sometimes of the not just the genocidal, but the omnicidal maniac, which actually makes me think of somebody else who I think falls in here. So I said when I talked about lawful evil that most dictators, well, I should have said most dictators are lawful evil. They want a society that answers to them, but they still want a society. Adolf Hitler, and I don't generally like to call human beings evil because they're more complicated than that, but anyone who orders mass genocide is an evil human being. I'm not sorry. But he is not. He is probably neutral, arguably chaotic evil, particularly for this reason. If you look at how he treated his generals, he liked to pit them against each other. He liked to pit the people in his cabinet against each other in games of social Darwinism. To see who was the strongest, who was the toughest, who he thought was the most fit to do the job. He liked to set his own underlings against each other, which is not a lawful act, which is why he's not actually lawful evil. He wants the order, but he wants to screw around inside of his own order too much. So that brings us to the end of the alignments, and actually just over an hour, which is good. Now that I've gone through all of this, and the main reason I went through all of this, well, I think there's some useful information here. If you're about to sit down to a D&D game, and your DM wants you to pick an alignment, maybe this will give you a hand. But honestly, I mostly did this because it's fun. I'm an old school gamer. We gamers like to argue about who fits into which alignment. And there's tons of other characters I didn't even get into. Some of which are very hard to fit into alignments. Conan the Barbarian is a tough cookie. He is very rigid on his code of ethics and honor, but he doesn't care very much about any. He doesn't impose that order on other people. The rigid adherence to his own code suggests lawful. His unwillingness to impose code suggests otherwise. Batman's a tricky case. In fact, I think the first time I tried to do this type of video, I said he was a weird type of lawful good, but he really isn't, because his morality is too flexible. I mean, he has two rules he absolutely won't, no guns and no killing that he won't violate, except all the times that he did. He doesn't have the strict adherence to a specific, you will do this, you will do that, you will do this, code of ethics that a lawful character who isn't strictly within the laws will generally follow. The point being, though, is that alignment should be a fluid thing. In older editions, if you changed alignment, you got a penalty to XP, you could even lose the level. All sorts of bad things would happen to you. That shouldn't be the way the alignment works. At most, it should. Honestly, I think when I run D&D, I don't bother with it. And I don't think people really should bother with it. Because it's not that it pigeonholes the character in a way that isn't necessary and doesn't really serve any purpose. Especially the old school versions. The old school, it usually came down to, detect evil, things like that. But you don't really need, because the idea of usually detect evil spells traditionally is the person an evil person. It's what's their intentions. If they're trying to hurt you, it worked. If they meant you no ill will, it didn't. That kind of thing. The only time something like alignment is relevant, in my opinion, is clerics and to a lesser extent paladins. But even there, you don't necessarily need an alignment, because you need to think about people's sense of morals and ethics in the real world, and how they change, and how they tend to be somewhat situational. Think, for example, for that matter, of the Inquisition or the witch hunts. Obviously, what the Inquisition and the witch hunts did is morally wrong in the real world. And I'm not about to try to defend that. But imagine, for the sake of argument, a world where real witches existed that had real magical powers that were actively trying to kill people and do every horrible thing that witch hunters said. Wouldn't hunting in that circumstances, isn't hunting witches and potentially putting them to death justified? Not because they're doing they're doing, but if they actually, if not saying they do, I'm not making an argument about the real world, but if people actually were committing murder through magic spells, would the death penalty? Could you make in a world where you think where there is a death penalty? Couldn't you make an argument that if I use magic to kill you, I'm just as guilty as if I shoot you with a gun? But it's very easy, even in that circumstance, to slide out of that good. Out of that, I'm trying to protect people from a real threat into becoming a monster, while you still perceive yourself as being a good person. A really good example of this you can find in the Dragonlance series in the character of the King Priest. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Dragonlance, because it is tragically, largely, often forgotten by newer geeks and gamers. It's an old fantasy series based on Dungeons & Dragons. The Dragonlance Chronicles and Legends are really good and some of the best contemporary fantasy, in my opinion. But it presents a character known as the Dragonlance Legends presents more of him, and he gets referred to a bunch in Chronicles. It presents a character known as the King Priest of Ishtar. He is is the ruler of a nation and a god of the holiest, noblest, most lawful good of lawful good. Well, funny enough, but of the god of paladins, the god of knights, the god of kings. For those of you who know D&D, he's the chief god of Bahamut. The chief priest of Bahamut. Of the chief priest of the god of Paladins. The god's name being Paladine. He's not an evil man. He doesn't start off as an evil man. He wants to protect his people. He sees a real threat. And he starts by outlawing evil actions. And then he goes to outlawing minotaurs and goblins and orcs and species that are normally evil and worship evil and the worship of the gods of evil, which is still an understandable argument. Then he starts to outlaw wizardly magic because it's not something under his control. It's not something directly aligned with gods. In Dragonlance, wizards are in fact servants of gods. 3 gods, one for each, for good, evil, and neutral wizards, which is beside the point. But they're not part of the normal priestly caste, and they don't answer to him, so he outlaws them. A series of horrible battles happen, massive destruction, and he basically says, "We'll let you live. We don't want to destroy the planet. Leave our city, leave our nation, leave our allied nations. Go back. We'll let you keep this tower, and you go there. You stay there. We won't come after you. You don't screw with us. We don't screw with you." Then it starts going further, policing how people think. Eventually, he becomes so frustrated with how slow everything is going, he decides to demand that the very gods themselves come down to his planet and smite the evildoers for him. He has the hubris to tell the gods what to do. This is a character that starts out as a lawful, especially in some of the other books that have been written, I haven't read, but from what I've seen, he starts out as a lawful good character. He starts out with good intentions. He is a kind, even the book, even Paladine in the Chronicles describes him as a good man. Paladine's alignment's a really interesting one, and actually I'm going to revisit this in a second. But In my opinion, the authors are wrong when they say that he was always a good man. He slides from being good into being darker and darker until he's evil. But it's not you're lawful good, now you're lawful evil. It's not even you're lawful good, now you're lawful neutral, you're lawful evil. It's a slow degradation and a change in perspective. A paladin who worships a very strictly lawful good god may slide away from that god as they become more and more extreme, as they take those good intentions to an extreme end. But they may always see themselves as following the dictates of their god. They may always see themselves as following, in 5th edition terms, as following the oath that they swore. What can happen instead, and I think makes for an more interesting character study. Oh my god, I forgot another really good example of lawful evil I'm going to get to in a second because it also relates. Is that cleric or that paladin who started out as lawful good, worshiping the god of truth and justice, who has become lawful evil in his attempt to root out the servants of the wicked. Maybe a devil starts answering his prayers, claiming to be the god he originally worshipped. Maybe a god of evil, a god of deception, starts answering those prayers, posing as the original god. And that paladin never realizes both the character and maybe even the player never even realized this change has happened until an emissary of the original god shows up to have a little chat with him. There's a really good role-playing perspective there in seeing more of the sliding nature of reality, of morality, than just boom, 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 you're this, or you're this. I also wanted to point out, I think most consequences for alignment shift, if you're going to use alignment at all, should be more role-playing based and less stat-based. Don't dock experience points. Don't dock levels. Don't immediately, unless they're just blatantly violating unless it's a paladin who's blatantly violating the oath that they chose, don't change character attributes. Don't make them immediately go oath-sworn. Don't make them go oath-sworn just because they're not worshiping the god they started out worshiping. Are they honoring the oath that they took? Because it's forsaking that oath. You can still be certainly the Avenger oath. You can still be an Avenger and be an evil character. And it's very easy to make that change. If it gets really extreme, maybe it's time to change some things around. Make them oath-sworn, make them a paladin of conquest, something of that nature. But that should come later. A good example of this, again, in Dragonlance, is eventually, as people got more and more extreme, the clerics started losing their ability to cast divine spells. Because they were more dedicated, because they became more dedicated to the king priest than to their god. But that deals with the relationship between the god and the worshiper. And the fact that nobody wanted to touch the king priest. A really interesting example of how to do this kind of slide and to potentially do a redemption arc is one of the most popular D&D villains of all time, also from Dragonlance, which is Lord Soth. Lord Soth is a villain that just oozes cool. He is a Death Knight. He is what happens when a paladin goes as bad as a paladin can go. He's a walking suit of charred black plate armor. If you look inside the visor, you see a horribly burned figure, somewhat mummy-looking almost, with blazing red eyes. Dragonlance doesn't have traditional paladins. They have what are called the Knights of Samna. Knights of Samna follow two things above all else. One is the oath, as Solomonos Mythos, my honor is my life. Oh, there's another good example of this point. The other one is the measure, which is 216 books that originally defined what honor is. Soth, there are three orders within the Knights of Salna. There are Knights of the Crown, which can be everyone starts as a Knight of the Crown. You earn your higher ranks. Knights of the Crown are universally the ones that most often welcome lowborn people. To be the higher ranks, you usually have to be of noble birth. There are exceptions made a handful of times. A knight, and they're basically overblown fighters. Once they gain a few levels, if they prove themselves and they go through a series of tests, they become Knights of the Sword. Knights of the Sword are more like paladins. And they dedicate themselves to a god. Well, all three orders are dedicated to God, three of the gods of good. Habakkuk is actually a god of nature, funny enough. Kidarajoth, the good god of war, who's the patron of the Knights of the Sword, and Paladine, who's the patron of the last order, which we'll get to in a second. But they dedicate themselves to the worship of God. They dedicate themselves more to goodness. They're usually of noble birth. If they prove themselves through the most dangerous and serious of trials, they rise to the rank of the Knights of the Sword, of the Rose, who are directly served Paladine, who are the most like the classical paladins, and are always of high birth. Soth made it all the way to a high-ranking Knight of the Rose. He was married. He had a loving wife. And when he was out on patrol with his men, he had his own keep, in fact. And when he's out on patrol with his men, he comes upon a group of elven priestesses who've been captured by ogre bandits. He and his men fight the ogres, save the women. He personally fights the biggest, ugliest, and most powerful of the ogres, their chieftain, in single combat to saves a particularly beautiful elven priestess who he falls in love with. This is where things start to go south. He does legitimately evil acts. He orders his servants to kill his wife and takes the elven woman as his wife instead. When the elven white woman is a very good woman and doesn't really understand what's happened at first. When she does, she prays to Paladine to show her a way to save him. This links back to the King's Priest story I told you. The King Priest pissed the gods off to the point that they basically decided to slam an asteroid on top of his nation and wipe it off the map. Paladine told Soth and his wife that this was going to happen, and then empowered Soth with the ability to stop it at the cost of his own life. Soth traveled Soth saw the chance and tried to take the chance of redemption, which I think is another important concept with these kinds of stories, and why I'm telling the story of Soth, is that you need to include this element of even if they fall, then you should give them a chance to fix it, to make it right. Soth did something monstrous in murdering his own wife just so he could marry somebody else. He was given an opportunity to redeem himself at the cost of his own life. This makes for good storytelling. So I would encourage, if you have a paladin who you think crosses over the line too far, talk to them about it and see if they agree with you. Talk about maybe a chance for redemption. Don't write it off. Don't just smack them down. Soth gets himself in trouble, on the other hand, because while he's on the road to the city of Ishtar, he runs into the elven priestesses he had met at the beginning of the story. Some years had gone on between the two meetings. They were now in close and true believers in the king priest's methods, and they knew what was happening. And they lied to Soth, told him that his elven wife was unfaithful, and that the child that she was to bear wasn't his. He turned away from his chance at redemption, went back to the castle to accuse her, and that's when the asteroid hit. As part of the asteroid strike, the castle erupted into flames. He walked into the throne room, and his wife begged him not even to save her life, to save the child. And he turned and he walked away. And she cursed him, and the gods cursed him. And he became what's known as a Death Knight. Like I said, it is what happened. It's a type of undead that is what happens when a paladin goes as wrong as a paladin can go. But that change, which I think is somewhat analogous to the Oathsworn change, happened after he committed an incredibly, unmitigatingly evil act that violated all of his oaths. And then he spit in the face of his own god when he was offered a chance to save himself, to redeem himself. And he was cursed to become this undead thing that walked the night. He was given great power to be able to just point at someone and say, die, and the person would fall over dead. Throw balls of flame, walls of ice. His loyal men who had helped carry out the murder were turned into skeletal warriors. The women who had deceived him turned into banshees. And for hundreds of years, Soth languished in his undead state. The supreme goddess of evil, Takesis, who was that world's version of Tiamat, came to him to offer him a chance to offer him a role in her armies. He said he would serve any of her minions who were brave enough to spend the night alone in his castle, which is a story for another day. Needless to say, one of them is. Who's a wonderful example of lawful evil. And he becomes fiercely loyal to her. That is part of why he's lawful evil. And part of why he's lawful evil is that he maintains his code of honor. In a sword duel, if you drop your sword, he'll give you a chance to pick it up. He's not completely honorable. He's still a cheat. He'll still use his magical powers against you. But he will meet a foe. He will meet a foe in honorable combat. It's never come up in the books or any of the modules I'm aware of. I always personally have thought of the opinion, if somebody openly challenged Soth to a one-on-one duel without Soth's magical powers, Soth might actually accept. Eventually, for many, many, many books down the road, Soth is offered another chance to work for Takesis again and tells her, go screw yourself. She gives him what he always wanted, turns him back into a mortal man. And he still tells her to go screw yourself. She kills him and he finally is allowed to die properly because he actually rejected evil, even at the cost of giving up the one thing he wanted. Remember, back and forth. Don't just pigeonhole characters into a single alignment. This is winding up much longer than I meant it to be. There's one other thing I was going to bring up with alignment, but I think I've gone on long enough. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first official episode of the Grumpy Old Gamer. I plan on doing one of these maybe once a week. Maybe less if I get lazy. Make sure to, if you enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe. If you agree with me, tell me so in the comments. If you think I'm full of crap, tell me so in the comments. If there's some great example of one of the alignments that I left out, let me know in the comments. I'm going next week, like I said, I think I'm going to do one about how to add some interesting twists to your horror game. So tune in for that. I'm shooting for probably Friday again, unless I have to work or something of that nature, which at the moment, as far as I know, I do not. And make sure to tune in tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Paranormal Encyclopedia, where we will be talking about the wickedest man alive. He's dead now, granted. And the great B666 Aleister Crowley. He is one of the most fascinating people you're ever going to see in the 20th century, in my opinion. He's a lot of fun, so check that out. For that now, that's it. This is Kevin Mears saying keep your dice handy. And you darn old young kids, keep off my dice. Have your own. Have a good night, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow with Paranormal Encyclopedia.